Hello and welcome to the first webinar of the LEK-project, the Let Europe Know project. This is the first webinar in a series of several according to the project plan, and they are done together with a guide for how to use webinar effectively. The project will produce a guide on how to use webinars effectively as a training method at times when very often you cannot participate or travel for a training. I got a message that my voice is not correctly transmitting. Could you please let me know in the chat window if you can hear me or if there is a breakup in my sound? Okay, so it seems most of you can hear what I'm saying. Excellent. This first webinar, which we're going to run now for 1 hour, is going to focus on setting the scene, describing why we who work in adult education should try to improve or learn how to best present our everyday life, the life of our schools, the life of our students and learners, or the concept of lifelong learning across national borders in an attempt to make it interesting for others. The project Let Europe Know builds on several previous projects, among them the Infonet project. As you can see in the top window here, the link to the information about this project is still on the Infonet webpage. The idea with the webinars is to set the scene and to show a method of further training of participants in various aspects. The guide that we will produce will help explain the caveats, the challenges, the difficulties, and the possibilities and pedagogy of using a webinar as a method for providing training. It's built very much on the experiences of the NVL network, the Nordic Network for Adult Learning, of which Alastair Creelman is a long-standing member. They are running webinars for several years, and they have managed to build a method of creating webinars that has proven to be very efficient, quite regardless of the topic. It is a challenge if you work in non-formal adult education that traditionally we consider the meeting, the communication, and the dialogue to be the strongest components of learning. And once you go into an online setting, once you go into a virtual setting, you are facing the challenges. How can you bring that feeling of community, of presence, and of dialogue into the meeting room? How can you create a sense of shared ownership? Those are, among many other things, what will be discussed in the guide, and which we will also discuss during the different modules that the LEK-project will offer during the life course of the project. But in order for us to be able to see why should adult education be visible in the surrounding world for those who are not involved in adult education, what's the landscape like? In what context are we trying to make ourselves important to others? We have asked Alastair to provide a presentation on what kind of communication goes on nowadays. We know that media is changing. We know that print media is being challenged, TV media is being challenged. But what are the arenas where people are using, what arenas are people using to communicate and to get information? And how does that affect how we communicate? So Alastair, I'll mute my microphone and take my camera off so people can see you better, and I give the word to you for a while. The floor is yours.
Okay, thanks very much. I had to jump out and back in again for a second. Sorry about that. But yeah, it's nice to be with you all just now. My name, as you see, Alastair Creelman. I'm Scottish from the beginning, but I've lived in the Nordic region for the last 33 years or so. And at the moment, I'm working at Linneaus University in Kalmar in the southeast of Sweden. I work as an e-learning specialist and involved in an awful lot of different projects, national and international, concerned everything to do with arenas for learning, you can say, where the digital arena and just about all aspects of it fascinate me. I'm going to talk about networking. I'm going to talk about sharing resources. I'm going to talk about new arenas for learning and hopefully giving you some ideas. All the links in my presentation are clickable, so you can just click either directly here or you can click on them in the recording. I'll just check, and the presentation comes up in a second. There we are, opening up. There's email address if you want to contact me on Twitter. There's my Twitter address, and I tweet only on work-related things, nothing personal. So, well, yes, you see me twice now. A day at the office. This is what it looks like actually right now because I'm sitting at that desk and I'm looking a bit like this. It's very very similar to at the moment. It's just I've got a different jersey on. But a day, my life is very much involved is international. I would say that I spend most of my time in places like this, in rooms, in virtual rooms, having project meetings, doing webinars, involved in teaching and discussions with people from basically all over the world. When I'm not having direct contact live like this, then I'm communicating with people with my networks via social media, and it's a sort of it's like being part of your own newsroom. Uh, it can roll along every day. There's a very inspiring meetings, and you go from one to the other. I actually have very few physical face-to-face meetings in my own building. It's rather ironical that it goes like that. So what's happening here? I think when you look at employers and what skills they're looking for in our students, both from adult education and higher education, it's these sort of skills that they keep saying. Now, these are very soft skills. They're not the skills that are normally taken up on our certificates and the descriptions of our degree courses. They're sort of, in a way, under the radar. How do we examine these sort of skills? How do we teach these skills? How do we show employers that our students have these skills? And how do we acquire these skills? Because these are skills that are not only digital skills, they involve the face-to-face environments as well, but they are magnified in the digital world. Communication is not as simple as it used to be. It's much more complex. Networking is more complex, more challenging. So is teamwork, especially when you do it digitally. Information skills, a greater challenge today than ever before because there's just so much information out there and you need to be able to filter. Problem solving, planning, you see what I mean? There's a lot to learn, both on site and online. And my first question really to you and to get you to think about, if we look at network literacy, I would say network literacy is the ability to join networks, to participate in networks, and above all, to build networks, build communities of practice around your own area. And that ability is something that I think is lacking even in our students. So don't be fooled by these old stories about digital natives. There's no such thing, I would say, and there's a lot of research to back me up. It's not a generational thing. It's about interest and it's about commitment. Yeah, it's generally about interest. I know many 60-year-olds who are much more digital than many teenagers. Um, we have a lot of social networks to help us. Think yourself, really. What networks do you have outside the physical networks of your colleagues in the office or in the school? How international are your networks? How national are they? And I'm talking about professional networks, people in your business, in your field? How much international contact do you have? Through Facebook groups, Google Plus groups, through Twitter, through LinkedIn. So write down in the chat. What networks do you have? Do you have networks outside your sort of hometown? And where do you have these networks? How wide are they? I don't mean exactly how many people are in them, but I mean, are you part of Facebook groups, professional ones? Have you looked at Google Plus? There are groups in just about every subject area you can think of. There are lots of hashtags on Twitter and people to follow on Twitter. And LinkedIn has many, many groups that you can benefit from. Keep writing them in the chat down there, and I'll as they come up, we'll see. There's a little bit of Twitter activity. I'll just move on. Why do we network? Well, basically, if you network, you're never alone. And in a way, it's like in the old days. I mean, you had this sort of staff room where you could ask the rest of the staff in your school about a question. But if you've got a virtual network, you can ask them 24 hours a day, and you very often get answers. People are very, very generous, I find, especially educators, in sharing their knowledge. So you can always ask your network questions. You can ask them for help. You can ask for support. If you don't know the answer to a problem, put your question out on a Twitter group or in a Facebook group or somewhere like that, and in the end, someone's going to come up with an answer. They may be able to guide you to some documents that are useful or a website that has something. There's, yeah, somewhere, a wide professional network due to my European project work. More usually email. Well, yes, it can be through email, but email is a terribly restricted form of communication. It's not open. Yep, professional groups and Facebook, LinkedIn account. Don't use it very often. Okay, consider it. Consider it. You can get inspiration from your network. You can talk about. It's not just a matter of know-how. It's about knowing where and knowing who. Because one of these days you'll find a question and you need an answer, and you remember, I know somebody in my network who used to work with that. And the quote, the network is the learning. George Siemens founded the pedagogical theory of connectivism, and the idea is there that you'll find learning in your network. You can learn from your network. Your network is a learning environment, and it's always on. Yep, there's people using some different forms there. Facebook groups, these are just a couple of ones which I belong to or administer, and I've found an enormous benefit from that. Very often it's a way of continuing the dialogue. Sometimes if we've had a webinar or a conference, create a Facebook group afterwards and let people continue the discussion there. It's most people are very comfortable in Facebook. That's the advantage of it. They're already logged in and they will see the posts as they come. And it's a great way of saying, right, we've had a great 2 days together. Let's continue the discussion in our group. And that can lead to, closer ties. People might decide to become real friends on Facebook and get to know each other better, even on a personal level. But even if they don't, they have those contacts. Twitter, a lot of people find Twitter a little bit disturbing. Of course, we hear an awful lot of nasty stuff with celebrities and politics and net hate and so on. It depends what you tweet about and what circles and what networks you have. Personally, I've never encountered any trouble on Twitter, but then again, I restrict myself to educators and educational topics, and I don't tweet about politics or anything controversial. There's Eon talking about a Pinterest account. That's also, there are lots of social networks you can use. And Pinterest can really be very inspiring. Basically, with Twitter, you choose who you follow. And when you tweet, the only people who will see your tweet are the people who follow you. So if nobody follows you, your tweets will go into the into a vacuum. No, they'll disappear forever. If a lot of people follow you, you may have an impact. But it's a great way of following people, people who you admire, people who you trust, and keep up to date with what's going on. You create networks there. You can inform people about your own projects, your own ideas, and links and reading that you are doing at the moment. You can take part in discussions. There are tweet chats that are very popular nowadays at set times each week. And I think most countries, there are educators who organize tweet chats on different subjects. You get help and support. LinkedIn, don't underestimate it. I mean, I tend to use LinkedIn as very much my online CV. This is where you find out about me. It's my professional social network. But you can show everything about you. It's your showcase. You can build your own networks in LinkedIn, of course. You can recommend each other, but there are groups. Have a look in LinkedIn at what groups are available and try them out. Go in and see what's going on there, because that can also lead to new connections. It's also, in many cases, very good for your career because it gets you noticed. And people might start looking at your profile. You might get invited to take part in projects. Another arena that I would strongly suggest for all educators is blogging. I started in 2008, and it's become a way of life, basically. I'm a sort of blogaholic. I spend enormous amounts of time blogging. I have 3 blogs that I juggle with, and they all are updated at least once a week. You've got to keep them regular, but it becomes your showcase. Your blog is also a bit like a CV, but the great thing about a blog is it shows who you are, your ideas, your reflections, your practice. You don't have to have any revolutionary ideas or theories. It's about showing how you are thinking about your work. Maybe sometimes it's more effective to show your weaknesses because people can reflect on that. Sometimes if you don't know the answer to something, write about what you're thinking. Say, I'm not sure about the answer to that. What do you think? And sometimes you get answers. You get connections that way. You don't have to come up with revolutionary ideas or earth-shaking theories. Sometimes just saying, "This is me. I'm worried about this. I'm not sure about that," can invite people to help you and build your network. Tools, WordPress, Blogger, anyone who's got a blog, a professional one. Put the link in the chat. Maybe some of the rest of us can have a look. Of course, it'll be in your own language, but hey, there's Google Translate and other tools. That's another good thing nowadays. If you use the translation tools that are available, then you get reasonable translations of just about everything. And I've quite often I've read things that were originally written in a language I don't speak so well, and I just get them translated. I get the idea. We can actually do that. So maybe we have just a little bit more. You can also publish yourself. Today there are free tools which enable you to write very professional newsletters, produce very professional blogs. You can produce your own ebooks and publish them completely free with videos, with pictures, with graphics, and there are set templates. It doesn't require an awful lot of IT skills to do it. You can produce your own magazine. It can be very glossy. It can be specially adapted for tablets or for mobiles and for computers. You really can do an awful lot. So you can publish yourself. This, of course, means that the world is flooded with self-publication. You don't have to go to a publisher to get published. You just publish. And of course, that puts demands on our education system, ourselves. We need to learn to filter. We need to learn source criticism. It's probably the most important subject we can learn at school. It should be part of every single school day, source criticism all the time. Where did you find this? Who writes this? Why? Who's behind it? Why do you think it's reliable? Can you find other sources that confirm what it says? All these questions should be going through everybody's mind every time they see something that's published, because there is no guarantee that it's true. There's no guarantee about anything. It's up to us to start being better consumers. Maybe we should move to another view to just see if there's a bit more. Is it this one? No, it's not. A lot of notes. Maybe I should go back to the first one. I'm making you giddy. There's a bit bigger chat window. If anyone wants to make any comments. By the way, if you want to get a clickable link in the chat, then you write the whole web address. Don't just write it won't make a clickable link unless you write in the whole HTTP www link, because we can't click on the ones that are there. Johanni, are you stressed by all this information flood? Well, as the American media expert Clay Shirky said a long time ago, the famous quote, it's not information overload, it's filter failure. You have to develop ways of filtering this information. And that's the subject of another demonstration or another talk. I use a lot of filters. I monitor hundreds of news feeds, but I do it in a way where I can do it very, very quickly, and it all comes to one place. You also get increasingly better to focus. It does mean, of course, that if you want to get noticed in this flood, you have to have good headlines, because very often people like me who sort of monitor what's going on in the world, we're attracted by a headline that tells us something. Mysterious headlines may be nice, but normally a headline that says what the article's about will attract my attention. So that getting noticed is very important in this flood. And some companies and some people are very good at getting noticed, even if the content isn't terribly great. And sometimes there is great content that hasn't got a very imaginative heading and not a very interesting photo, and they tend to get lost in the flood. Oh yes, of course, the filtering true and false information is incredibly difficult today, because media are getting better and better at manipulating. And you find that people are using photographs from a completely different event and then putting in the same photograph to say something totally different. And there are many, many cases of that. And there's a lot of disinformation in the world. And that means we have this problem of the filter bubble, where companies like Google and Facebook and so on would like us to rely on their way of interpreting the world. I think you all know about the filter bubble. Eli Pariser, I think, was the person who came up with the idea. It's about how, especially on Google, but also on all the other search engines like Bing and Yahoo, and even they know what you search for, they know what you like, they know what you click on, and they give you stuff that they think you like. And as time goes on and they get to know you better, you only get things that you will agree with. And so you can get into this false sense of security where you think that the whole world thinks as you do. And that makes it very easy for extremists, through this sort of filter personalization. Extremists, when they search on Google, they just get tons of other extremists on their Google search. And so they come to the conclusion that the whole world thinks the same as they do. And they only get stuff that they like. And so they don't hear the opposition at all. It's like if you look in the US election just now, if you're a Trump supporter and you're using Google or whatever, Google's just going to give you more and more Trump stuff, which will make you more and more convinced. And so we're all retreating into our bubbles where we think we're free and we think we're democratic, but in fact we're being fed the information that someone thinks we want. And again, yeah, journalists, who can you trust? A wonderful question. I don't have any answer. I'm not sure who I trust. We think we trust certain people, but there's always someone behind them. It's very quiet. Not sure if are you going to anyone going to say something, or is it shall I continue? Just keep the chat going through it, Alexandra. Yeah, I mean, Brexit affected me extremely, and I'm still shocked. But that's typical bubble. Um, if you read certain newspapers and you follow certain media in the UK, you become convinced that the EU is a terrible conspiracy that is only there to get money out of the UK, and it's time for us to leave. And you become convinced of that fact because it keeps giving you more and more evidence. And the same thing is happening in most countries. So the digital world provides us with enormous opportunities, but at the same time, a lot of dangers. Okay, I'll just keep chatting, and I'll just get back to the second part. Basically, in the past, learning spaces were classrooms and auditoriums. There are a lot more today, and even the classrooms are changing. The learning spaces are becoming more active. Teachers are not up front as much as they used to be. The students are learning together actively in the classroom, and they're also doing it online. We are interacting online synchronously as we're doing just now, but also asynchronously. The tools are becoming more and more, in a way, sophisticated in function, but simpler and simpler in terms of ease of use. You don't need to know anything about technology to use these tools. You just need to work out which buttons to press, which isn't um, terribly technical. For example, we can open up the classroom, even the physical classroom. You can actually open up your classroom on the fly, in other words, spontaneously, by offering a stream on Skype to a selected number of receivers. You can use Facebook Live, which is a wonderful function. I've used that, where we can, just by pressing on Facebook and then pressing the live Facebook Live button, I can film this and send it live on my Facebook stream or in a Facebook group. And suddenly people from outside the classroom are part of the activity, and it requires almost no technology at all. Periscope does the same thing. You can have it use this Adobe Connect or WebEx and so on for planned synchronous meetings. And you can use common online workspaces, tools like Padlet and Google Docs, where people from anywhere can get together and share material and write documents together. Padlet, I would recommend thoroughly for you to investigate if you don't know it already. Just click on the word Padlet. It's a link to the program. It's a free tool. You can buy a pro license for very little. But the idea is it's like a great big workspace on the net. And I've used it for group work in webinars and in physical classrooms because very simply, you can see an example there from one seminar I did where we've loaded up the group work notes. Each group writes notes on their group work and then just load it up onto this one page. The online group can do the same thing. So the online group and the class group, they're on the same page here, and the results of their discussions are up there for all to read. You can put the recording from a webinar like this on this sort of page. You can put up slideshows, photo, screenshots, links, video, audio, follow-up, and you put it all on one web page, and everyone can access it, and it stays there for as long as you like. That means that from a group work session, you can make a space where all the results, all the recordings, all the link, everything is all assembled. A wonderful opportunity for students to revise or for participants in a seminar to have a permanent record of what they did that they can go back to any time. That's what I mean by creating new spaces for learning. We have the area of massive open online courses. How many people have been on one? I'm just going to quickly go through this, but this is something that's been, it's been going since 2008, but basically it is university level courses, but even adult education courses that are on the net, that are free, that anyone can join. There are no preconditions, but you don't get any authorized credentials. You don't get university credits, although some are beginning to do that. Mostly it's learning for the sake, it's lifelong learning. There is a massive range. Here you get an idea of how big the MOOC market is at the moment. There are various consortia around the world offering MOOCs in many different languages, and many universities who provide these courses. Click around and see what you can find. Have a go. Another area that's growing is virtual mobility. Internationalization should not just be for a few people who can afford it. It should be for everyone. By using digital tools and arenas, we can provide internationalization at home for all students and teachers by using tools like this. It's about inclusion and accessibility. And you can work on online courses, developing new programs, or simply project work where you're collaborating with students and teachers from other universities and other schools. And the advantages of this are enormous. If we can offer this type of internationalization at home by networking, by using the digital tools that are available, we teach our students to work in virtual international teams, a very essential skill in many international companies today. They also build their professional networks. And it's a sustainable collaboration because these networks will continue for the future. And also you introduce a greater cultural diversity. So how to get started? Here's some tips for you. Have a look at your digital footprints. Google yourself. It's rather interesting. What do you look like professionally on the net? If you don't like it, try and change it. How can you change your profiles? How can you give a better impression of yourself? Start a blog, start a website, join communities, participate, try an open course. There are many ways. And get help from your network. Build your network first, of course. These are some of my footprints, blogs, Twitter, etc. I see the time is running. So I think, Juhani, questions, ideas?
Okay, I think we will move from this view. I'll let it stay here so that you can see it. This presentation is downloadable from the main page, where we will go in a second. And there all the tools and the links and the contact details to Alastair is also available. So we're going to move now back to this view. Thank you, Alastair. That's a lot to take in a short period of time. The landscape of learning and the landscape where we spend our lives has changed and is about to change. There's always the idea that ICT and new technology will revolutionize the way we do many things, and yet it is very often a feeling that when will that happen? Well, it's around the corner. It's with the next version of something. It's with the update of, or it's with the improved something. But when you take a moment to pause and look back at the last 10 years of development in technology, in education, and in possibilities as a pedagogue, you notice that the revolution in very many ways have already happened, and we might not always realize it. Why is this relevant for those of you who are participating in this webinar? Well, rather than talking and starting this webinar to talk about how can you write an article that is interesting to an audience outside of your own community or country, we wanted to start with looking at what does that audience look like? In what reality does that audience move? When Infonet started, it started very much as a service to provide interesting insights, stories, and ideas from other countries and project experiences that would be shared as a resource for you to know about what goes on outside your own bubble that we talked about earlier. But today, 2016, the landscape in which that material is being sent out has changed and is changing dramatically. And if we want to be relevant in that period of time where we have to know and understand that landscape, and we have to figure out how to navigate with it on our own terms. Alastair mentioned, and we spent some time in this webinar talking about the filter bubble. And that is a big challenge for us as individuals. How do we manage to break through such a bubble to reach those people who we think needs our information and who would benefit from knowing the things that we can offer them? And how do we ourselves as individuals break our own bubbles, or at least learn how to question our own bubbles? Those are topics for several other webinars that has to do with technological development and societal development, which is slightly outside of the scope of this particular webinar, but they are often covered in the webinars offered by NVL on digital democracy, for example, and how you can use tools to create participation. Let's have a look at the chat to see if there's come up. Alastair asked about your comments, and Ian asked about the people who need education and don't have computer or digital skills, which of course will affect their ability to participate on the level that we have been talking about. And as all of you in the group come from different parts of Europe and from different settings, I also assume that we are not all on the same page. We're not using these methods, these tools in the same way, and the audiences we are reaching towards might not also yet use the tools in the same way. Filter bubble is dangerous because it's very easy to assume that people around you and people in, for example, learning have a similar frame of reference as you do yourself, and of course that's not necessarily the case. So I would like to second Alastair's question to ask you more in specifics in your context where you are working, and we are trying to create information that is relevant for others. How does the information landscape look like today? Where do people go for information? That's the first question I have for you.
I think you all.
No? Yeah, go ahead, Alastair.
I think you probably all know the same answer as me. I mean, people go all over the place for information. Increasingly the web, increasingly social media. There's a massive danger, which we already see the fruits of in the political upheavals going on all around the world. This filter bubble problem, and also in a way that even Facebook acts as a filter bubble by providing you with the sort of news that they think you like. And so it's very simple. I mean, there have been experiments where people have gone onto Facebook and created a new, kept their profile, but changed some of their preferences and started following people who were more politically extreme. And in one case I read, the guy actually only took about 2 or 3 weeks before his Facebook feed had totally flipped and was now absolutely full of extreme right-wing propaganda. And he was frightened at how quickly it flipped. And suddenly he was being pumped, news was being pumped to him that was confirming an extremist view that Facebook thought he now subscribed to. So that, I mean, there is a danger. We need to be exposed to alternative alternative interpretations. But you need to be very aware of all this before you actually look for it. So that people who are aware, who are digitally aware, and who are aware of even concepts like the filter bubble, do tend to look around and question and look for alternative sources. But the average person doesn't. And they're not even aware that they're being manipulated. And that's worrying. In a way, we need much more media literacy courses. We need to have that as part of the school curriculum, at all levels, about. And as I said, source criticism is just so central. It's got to be discussed every single day, not just in school, around the dinner table, and so on. Where did you get that information from? Do you trust it? Who else says the same thing? And even then, you're not sure. It's a totally new landscape, and we're having trouble adapting to it.
I see that Michael Summers is writing something in the chat window. I think it might be a longer input because it's taking some time to get to the chat window. And as far as I can see, the rest of you are not currently writing. So I don't know whether you consider the question unclear or whether it was too complex to respond to in a chat window. I think it's important to consider and look at the information landscape that you are currently involved in. Alastair mentioned networks, using networks, being familiar with networks, and it's useful, I think, as a professional writing about adult education to have a community of peers that you can get support, ideas, and also check and test some of your ideas. But it's equally important to understand or to use it as a possible channel. When we talk about impact, that we would like to write stories and tell about adult education in a way that is interesting to an audience, we must understand the audience. We cannot just write a text and have a simple guideline saying, write simple, be explanatory, don't use abbreviations, as we have had in the past, and hope that that would be enough to create attention or to create interest in the story. If it's true that many of the Europeans we want to reach with information and news about adult education live in a landscape which has changed and which includes a lot of information channels, we have to act accordingly. We have to adapt our messages and the way we communicate to the platforms that we are using. So, okay, let's see, someone has answered something. In my point of view, we need not only to learn to filter and understand. As Democrats, we should support professional journalism and new investigative networks. Yes, there is a trend in some countries to use citizenship journalism or crowdsourced journalism to support investigations and to support longer pieces, longer texts. It could be interesting for LEK-project to write about or to look a little bit around how have that worked, what have been the effects of those attempts, and in what circumstances were they used. Because with democratization of publication, where everybody can be a publisher, as Alastair said, everybody can start a blog, everybody can start to write comments on Facebook, and you don't need any source, you don't need to quote sources, you can just inform or disinform. It's increasingly challenging also to provide news or to provide materials in such a setting, because the audience, if they are serious and they do what Alastair said, which is to learn media literacy, they will also become skeptical to what we write. I mean, we should all be able to provide the sources. We should all be able to answer the tough questions of criticisms because, to be fair, we also have our own filtered view of what we consider to be important and what we want to use or to put into the stories because we have an agenda. It might not be an agenda of hate. It might not be an agenda of very conscious direction, like a political ambition, but it will still be there. It might be that it's about the progress of lifelong learning or the values of learning. So what I've taken from what Alastair has said is also to be very self-reflective and self-critical in understanding how we are also, when we produce something, when we write something, it's based on our own assumptions. I have a question. Do you want to comment, Alastair? Then I have question number 2.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Let's please come with more views in the chat. I was also thinking about, you mentioned about citizen journalism and so on. There's also there's a great boom at the moment in alternative news services, alternative news sites. These news sites are often extremely professionally produced. They look really nice. They look very serious. They often have quite serious sounding names, but in fact are misinformation centers. We have many cases in Sweden of that. It's even more abroad, where at first glance it looks like a serious news service with lots of articles about things that are happening and editorials and so on, but actually it's an extremist group that lies behind it, and the entire site is basically is full of lies and deceit. There are interviews with people who don't exist. There are interviews with they're completely made up. And also there are disinformation sites which will publish sort of extremist or rather extreme views with the intention of irritating a certain group in society and getting them to react and seeing the storm that develops around this. And that's been proven on on many occasions. So the question is, it's becoming harder and harder to know who to trust. One of you mentioned about professional journalists. Well, the trouble is professional journalists today write for quite often newspapers and magazines that have traditionally have a very high profile, sometimes a national profile, sometimes a reputation that goes back to almost 100 years. But those papers are now ruled by multi-millionaire media moguls somewhere else. I'm thinking the likes of Rupert Murdoch, whose political agenda is often rather extreme and extremely selfish. And they may be professional journalists, but I can name several newspapers which I would not trust a single article ever that I read there, whose credibility I would think is below any blog. And there's professional journalists working for them. So who do you believe?
Yes.
You've got to know who's behind it. And when you have a media landscape that is so gigantic, the diversity is almost destroying the product.
Yeah.
When you democratize so totally the publication of journals and news, the result is that nobody believes anything.
And yet, to be able to conduct investigative journalism, you do need resources. And Michael, your example of the Panama Papers is a good one, because it's also, what we have to understand is the print media is being very threatened by the change in the landscape, the change in people's behavior, because they're losing revenues. People are not buying the newspapers, meaning there are less advertising revenues, meaning they need to figure out some ways to become relevant in the digital age. Things like the Panama Papers, which were done as a cooperation between journalists on established newspapers for a long time together, and data-driven journalism proves that they are relevant, proves that if you do a work in a very thorough manner, and you're not afraid to dig into very sensitive materials. As an individual, you would get into trouble for doing that, but as a media outlet, you might still be able to have the legislative, whatever the word is in English, power behind you to help you when they start suing you, when you start to get into troubles. That's something we could not expect an individual to do on their own. My point being that if we want to be relevant with the texts that we are writing, we need to be able to quote the sources, we need to be able to identify and tell about the reasons why we exist, and we need to identify, I think, the good forces, those who are trying honestly to be independent and still do a good job within professional journalism as well. And I think now, perhaps for the first time, they might also be quite willing to listen. I see several examples of that. I see the BBC and I see Guardian and I see many other news and media outlets cooperating with the third sector or with individuals because they need to be relevant. So we have that option. The opportunity is there. And as Alastair said earlier, the times are changing. When the times are changing, we see incredible big threats in terms of you can trust anybody and the disinformation is so easy to put out. But you can also use that, you can leverage that power if you're smart about it and use that for something else, in my opinion. Ian writes, we should concentrate on small groups or choose the right tool for information. Target study group is very important. Yes. And Alastair, you write it's harder than ever to win credibility. Exactly. So my next question to you, which is a bit more concrete than the information landscape one, is what will catch your attention in the flow of information and all the channels you're following? What is it that makes you click on something? You can either comment and reflect on it in the chat window, or we will also bring that to the training session in Germany, because these things do not have a simple, quick answer. It's not about creating or reading a manual, follow that and everything will be dandy in the world of journalism or in our information services. These are very tricky questions which the biggest media corporations on this planet have not yet been able to master sufficiently, because they have been run over by the algorithms of Facebook and Google. And they're still struggling with the power shift which has ensued. We, as individuals, may not be able to affect a whole lot of that. We should be aware of it. We should not be naive about who is running the platforms, what are they for, and what do the algorithms and filters create. But we have to be able to know them and to work with them and to tweak them, to consider how we can use them for our benefits. That is my main target, my main point with this introductory webinar. It is, in my opinion, no reason to become disillusioned and say, oh, it doesn't matter, the fight is lost, we can do nothing. They're running all over us. Because remember, the fact that we have a new information landscape, or getting one, doesn't mean that the old one was any better necessarily. We had also very little control as individuals, as citizens, as adult educators over what the print press traditionally would write about. And 10 years ago, if this webinar would have been 10 years ago, we would complain, it's so difficult to get the attention of the press officers, the people in the media, because they're not finding us interesting enough. There has to be a juicy scandal or something. So the challenge is still to get attention, to be relevant in society. It's just that the place where that happened has changed a little bit. That is my point. You say it's down to headlines and sound bites. I think we will discuss that in the training sessions as well, because when it comes down to writing a text, you still have some basic elements that you need to get in place for the text to work, and that's handicraft, and you can learn some of that handicraft. What was true for a headline 40 years ago is not true today, but there are similar kind of rules, and also as with everything that regards rules, in my opinion, you can learn the rules and then you can learn to consciously skip the rules, but you have to be aware of them. You have to know that they're there, and then you can decide, I'm not playing by those rules, I'm doing it in a completely different way. Maria says that you will think about the question of catching attention and information landscape to the next meeting. Very good. The third and the final thing I wanted to add to the discussion today and to for the reflection aspect is this. We have another 4 or 5 minutes before we are closing this webinar. Is even if we are flooded with information, and even if the number of channels is very big, very large, and many of us will get a lot of information all the time, and we have to filter very strongly. Regardless, even if that's true, it is also true that today, when you write a text for the net, it has a much longer tail. You might not catch everybody's attention the moment you publish it, but you might get somebody to read it 2 years later, 3 years later, because they're looking for that specific information. That affects severely how you should be writing. You should not be writing with the best before date, which is tomorrow. We cannot win that struggle because the information flow is so fast. We need to incorporate elements and materials that presumably could work also in a couple of years' time. And what that means exactly, what kind of things are there in terms of human interest, in terms of additional materials, in terms of open-ended questions and follow-ups, that's an issue for either another webinar or for a late night discussion in the Klausenhof Academy after the formal training sessions, because I think we can use that to our benefit as well. We can be relevant on that scope much more easy than we can be relevant in competing with all the news channels on the world about getting things out quickly and read me first. If you have any comments on that one, please feel free to add to the chat. I'm looking at the clock and I'm going to stop the recording now in a second so that people who are watching this don't have to watch any longer, because we have run for almost 1 complete hour. So